Hey guys, it's Tamara. Happy New Year. So glad that you're here with me today. I want to talk to you a little bit about trauma. Trauma is my niche. It is my certification, my specialty as a therapist. I work a lot with emotional and psychological trauma, primarily with children and adolescents, but I've grown to expand that specialization to include adults dealing with grief and loss, as well as transitions in life. So I want to point out some misconceptions, and I'm going to give you 5 misconceptions that people have about trauma. I'm starting to see that trauma is becoming almost like a sport. The topic of trauma is in a lot of ways almost becoming like a catch-all term. Everybody is traumatized. Everybody has dealt with some kind of trauma. Everybody is struggling with some kind of trauma. And while I believe that most humans have some kind of trauma, I do not believe that you can categorize everybody or most people as clinically traumatized. And what I mean by clinically traumatized is having the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, or being clinically that's the word I'm looking for, being clinically vulnerable. I'll use that. Being clinically vulnerable, meaning having to see a therapist or a mental health professional because of a traumatic event. I don't think everybody qualifies for that. A lot of people are starting to use the term to apply to situations that just simply aren't traumatizing. And I think in some ways that creates confusion. It also is like a slap in the face for people who really have been traumatized and really are experiencing the symptoms of trauma, which are often impairing and hard to get over. I also think the catch-all term trauma, I think it can also be rather disturbing for a therapist to sit back and you hear everybody throwing around the term traumatized, or I was traumatized, or this is trauma, or that's trauma. I think it's good to separate what a bad situation is versus trauma. I think that's important. And I also think it's important to help clients and patients who are diagnosed with PTSD understand that their concerns are legitimate, despite so many people using the term and throwing it around carelessly. So I wanted to get that out of the way and kind of dispel some myths there. But let me give you 5 misconceptions about the term of trauma. All right, so the first misconception is that trauma only happens to adults, and I think that is a huge misconception. Kids can be traumatized. They don't have to have the capacity to understand everything, but they can be traumatized. They don't have the capacity to understand things that maybe adults understand, but they have the capacity to be traumatized. I like to refer to trauma as a situation that we are not prepared to deal with. It's a situation that causes the pain and the suffering to outweigh our ability to cope with it. So kids who don't understand domestic violence can still have a response to that violence that outweighs their ability to cope with it. So it's still traumatizing, even though they don't fully understand it. So can kids suffer from trauma? Definitely, most likely. I think kids are very vulnerable to trauma because their little brains are not fully developed yet. So not only do they not comprehend what's going on, they are biologically incapable of fully understanding what's going on, and their brain reacts negatively to that traumatic situation. So kids can be traumatized. All right, so misconception number 2 is that you can heal from trauma. Yes, you can heal from trauma, but the scars are going to always be there. The wounds may heal, but the scars are going to always be there. You may have memories. Negative situations in your life might trigger those feelings to come back up into your life again, or into your mind and into your heart again. You might start having post-traumatic stress symptoms once again. So once traumatized, if you ask me, always traumatized. You're going to always have the scars, even if the symptoms are not as negative or as frequent as they once were. So that's one way to look at that. All right. So misconception and myth number 4 is that trauma can be cured with medication. And it's important that I highlight that it cannot be traumatized with cannot be fixed or remedied with medication. Excuse me. Trauma really is a psychological, a biological, and emotional thing. And I think medication can be helpful to control secondary symptoms. And what I mean by that is an inability to sleep, depression, anxiety, but it cannot cure the mind from experiencing or re-experiencing the traumatic situation. So medication can help control depression and anxiety and symptoms, but it cannot help control one's perception of that trauma. It does not cure. It supports, it does not cure. All right. And lastly, the 5th misconception that a lot of people have about trauma is that you can get over it. I think I may have said this earlier. Once traumatized, always traumatized. You're going to always have the scars, even though the situation may not be as bad as it once was. Even though you may be out of that traumatic situation, you always are going to have the scars. So can you just get over your trauma? Absolutely not. I'm of the firm belief that you have to work through your trauma. You have to have somebody that cares about you to help you work through it. Once you organize it in your mind, work through it in your heart, that is when you can come to a place of safety and better health. But I think you're going to always have the scars no matter what. All right, guys, so thanks so much for being with me today. And please go to my YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/TamaraH and check out my other videos on this topic. I'm going to start posting more YouTube videos in this new year on trauma. I think it's a very important topic. We rarely talk about it, so stay tuned for that. If there's a topic that you would like me to consider or talk about, please feel free to tweet me at TherapistT, and that's at Therapist, TEE, or you can go to my website, infiniteknowledge.com, scroll down on the front page, scroll down to the bottom, leave me an audio message or an email at contact@infiniteknowledge.com. All right, guys, thanks so much. And please give me a thumbs up on this video if you liked it. Also, click the little bell on the side, which notifies you when I put out new videos on my YouTube channel. All right, guys, thanks so much. And Happy New Year once again. Bye.